At my sister's wedding, I stood at the grand entrance in a dress I designed myself, elegant, understated, and worth more than the average guest list combined. I gave my name to the staff. They frowned, tapped on their tablet, looked again. Then the words that changed everything. Sorry. Your name's not on the list. I thought it had to be a mistake. I had designed the invitations, the menus, the entire wedding theme. I made the dress. I turned to my mother. She didn't look surprised. In fact, she looked amused. She leaned in, lowered her voice, and said, "Your sister married into money. We can't have a poor little designer embarrassing us." That was the moment everything snapped into place. Every insult, every dismissal, every time I was overlooked. They never planned to include me. I was good enough to work for them, but not good enough to be seen. So I smiled, turned, and walked away. But before I left, I said just one thing, then pay for the wedding dress. 3 days later, my mother opened the invoice, the price tag $27,500. She called me, then called again, and again. 98 missed calls. This isn't just a story about being left out. It's about what happens when the person you dismiss turns out to be the one holding the thread. Stay with me. What happened next turned everything upside down. Claire Sutton was 32 years old, unmarried, and lived alone in a restored loft above a quiet gallery in Savannah. From the outside, she seemed ordinary, polite, understated, private. But behind her reserved smile was one of the most recognized forces in the high-end bridal industry. Under the pseudonym Eloise, Claire had designed wedding gowns worn by heiresses, media moguls, and political daughters. Her work wasn't flashy. It was refined, hand-sewn, whispered about in elite circles for its artistry. No one in her family knew, and that was exactly how she preferred it. The Suttons were a Southern family with a taste for status. Her mother, Linda Sutton, had mastered the art of social climbing. Her older sister, Rachel, was the golden child, the polished, perfect daughter, whose only ambition was to marry well and look the part. Claire, with her calloused fingertips and late-night sketching by lamplight, had never fit in. Her father had been the only one who believed in her, but he passed away when she was 16. Since then, Claire had been tolerated but rarely acknowledged. Still, when Rachel called months earlier to say, "I want something different for my dress," Claire felt a flicker of hope. Rachel claimed she was trying to be smart with the budget, said Claire's eye for elegance would save them thousands. Claire agreed not because she needed the money, but because she wanted desperately to be seen. She designed the dress herself, spent over 120 hours on it, imported lace, hand-finished seams, every bead sewn with care. She also designed the printed menus, the welcome signs, the seating chart. No one paid her. No one asked how much it cost. They simply expected it the way the Suttons always did. The morning of the wedding, Claire dressed with care, not to impress, but to respect her own work. Her gown was her own design, soft gray silk, high neckline, clean silhouette, elegant without outshining. She wore a small pair of heirloom earrings, her father's last gift to her, and a pale pink lip. It was a quiet tribute to the kind of woman she had become despite everything. When she arrived at the estate, the ceremony had not yet begun. She walked past the stone fountain, through the arch of climbing roses she had suggested during the planning stage, and reached the reception entrance. A young staff member stood there, tablet in hand, checking names. Claire smiled gently. "Claire Sutton." The woman tapped the screen, paused. "Could you spell that for me?" She did. Another pause. Another scan. Then came the phrase that made Claire's chest tighten despite the composure she wore like armor. "I'm sorry. Your name isn't on the list." Claire inhaled slowly. "I designed the dress. I'm the bride's sister." The woman looked truly uncomfortable. "I understand, but the guest list is final. I'm not authorized to let in anyone who's not approved." Claire nodded once, lips pressed together, then turned toward the crowd inside. That's when she saw her mother Linda gliding toward her like a swan on polished marble. Her expression didn't hold concern. She wasn't surprised to see Claire there. In fact, she looked prepared. You came, Linda said, her voice calm. That was brave. Claire kept her voice low. I'm not on the guest list. No, Linda replied, folding her hands neatly in front of her. We didn't include you. Why? Linda glanced over her shoulder as if someone might be watching. Then she leaned in slightly. Rachel is marrying into a very respectable family. Wealthy, educated, prominent. We can't have someone like you showing up in a homemade dress reminding everyone what we used to be. Claire stiffened. I'm not a liability. You're not one of us, Claire. You've always been on your own path. And that's fine. But this isn't your moment. It's Rachel's. Let her shine. Claire's heart beat loudly, but her voice was calm. I made the dress. Linda's smile didn't reach her eyes. And we're grateful. Truly. But the job is done now. It was a clean dismissal. Polished. Cruel in its subtlety. Claire felt the sting but didn't show it. Instead, she looked directly at her mother and said without raising her voice, Then pay for the wedding dress. Linda blinked. What I said, Claire repeated. You can go ahead and pay for the wedding dress. Before her mother could respond, Claire turned and walked away. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. She crossed the gravel courtyard, stepped into her car, and pulled out her phone. The invoice had been drafted days ago, itemized professional and undeniably real. She clicked send. 3 days later, during lunch at a quiet cafe, Claire glanced at her phone. 98 missed calls. All from her mother. 1 voicemail. She played it once. Claire, we need to talk about the invoice. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can you please call me? She didn't. Some debts can't be paid in money. But this one, this one could. Claire didn't return her mother's calls. Not after the invoice, not after the voicemail. Silence was no longer a passive choice. It was her form of peace. And as she stirred her tea at the cafe that afternoon, her thoughts drifted to places no invoice could reach. Places older than resentment, deeper than pride. She had not always been this composed. There was a time when Claire Sutton cried over cold dinners and birthdays forgotten. A time when she'd squeeze herself into tight dresses and tight smiles, hoping for one approving nod from her mother. But that approval had never come. Not when she painted. Not when she placed second in a regional art competition. Not even when her fashion sketches were published anonymously in a student magazine her senior year. Because in the Sutton household worth was measured in conformity, not creativity. Rachel was the shining star. From kindergarten, her drawings were framed on the fridge. Her report cards were bragged about at brunch. She was sent to etiquette lessons, posed for family holiday cards, and at 16 had a full portfolio of modeling headshots. Their mother groomed her to be admired, pursued, married well. Rachel didn't question the attention, she absorbed it like sunlight. Claire was different. She didn't dress like the other girls. She asked too many questions. She spent hours alone flipping through fashion catalogs and sketching figures in spiral notebooks. When she spoke about design, her mother would interrupt with a sigh. That's not a real future, Claire. It's a hobby, a distraction. Rachel got piano lessons. Claire got silence. But there had been one voice in her corner, her father. James Sutton had been a quiet man, the kind who fixed broken faucets without being asked, and remembered the birthdays of the mailman's children. He didn't say much, but when Claire showed him her first full fashion sketch, a lavender gown with a scalloped hem and embroidered neckline, he looked up from his newspaper and said, "You've got an eye for beauty. Don't ever let anyone shame you for seeing the world differently." That sentence became her compass. He started sneaking her books on textiles and pattern making. When her mother scoffed, he told her gently, "Let Claire be Claire." And for a while he protected her, buffered her from the subtle dismissals, the dry looks, the unspoken rankings. Then he died. Heart failure. It happened just before Claire's junior year of high school. Rachel cried publicly and was consoled by neighbors. Claire cried alone quietly behind closed doors. No one noticed she stopped drawing for 6 months. No one noticed she stopped eating dinner with the family. She faded from the rhythm of the household like a melody no one cared to hum anymore. From that point forward, it was as if Claire had been erased not in cruelty, but in convenience. She wasn't invited to mother-daughter brunches. Her birthday gifts became checks in envelopes. Her milestones passed without celebration. And when she applied to a fashion school in New York and was accepted on full scholarship, Linda Sutton simply said, "At least that won't cost us anything." It did cost Claire something. A great deal, actually. But she never let them see it. In that space of rejection, Claire found her sanctuary in design. She buried herself in color theory, garment construction, couture history. She interned with tailors who barely spoke English, sewed buttons through the night for bridal ateliers, and sold sketches online under anonymous names to build a reputation. She learned everything no one believed she could on her own terms. She learned not just how to create beauty, but how to survive it. That isolation sharpened her. Not bitter, not cold, just clean like polished steel. Her friends came not from family, but from quiet corners of the industry, mentors, stylists, pattern makers, assistants, who didn't care about her last name. She earned her respect in pinpricks and pleats, not parties. It wasn't that Claire resented Rachel. Not exactly. It was more that she resented what Rachel had been allowed to be visible, wanted, celebrated. Claire had to earn every glance, every dollar, every moment of dignity. But she did. And that perhaps is what hurt her mother the most. Because no matter how far they tried to push her away, Claire built something stronger than their expectations. She built a self they could neither control nor claim. And now, as the Sutton name was paraded around the wedding estate tied to a groom with 5 generations of banking heritage, Claire knew she had never truly belonged to that legacy. She belonged to something better. She had shaped her identity not through inheritance, but through fire, not through comfort, but through creation. And they would learn whether they liked it or not that even forgotten children grow into women who don't forget who they are. Claire never planned to become famous. In fact, the more people talked about her designs, the more carefully she guarded the truth behind them. Fame in her world was a costume she never wanted to wear. What mattered wasn't her name. It was the stitchwork, the story sewn into every seam. That's why Eloise was born. Eloise was elegant, untouchable, and invisible. She didn't take interviews. She didn't show up at fashion weeks or stand backstage for applause. There were no selfies, no behind-the-scenes reels. Her branding was handwritten notes, wax-sealed boxes, and the unmistakable quiet confidence of someone who let her work speak for itself. Her designs arrived in luxury garment bags with handwritten tags, "To the bride who deserves to feel remembered." That was her voice, and the world fell in love with it. Within 5 years, Eloise had become a name whispered among elite bridal boutiques. Stylists referred their most demanding clients to her. Her gowns sold at silent auctions worn by women whose names never appeared in tabloids, but who moved the strings of society nonetheless. It wasn't the lace or the cut that made her work different. It was the intimacy. Each gown carried a pulse, something deeply personal, yet timeless. Among her earliest clients was a boutique firm that would later merge into Grant & Ellis, the luxury label owned by Michael Grant. Claire had no idea at the time. She only knew the brand paid fairly, offered creative freedom, and never asked to meet in person. She preferred it that way. Contracts were signed digitally, her identity obscured behind a proxy email and a legal agent. All payments were made through her incorporated name, CE Designs, LLC. No one ever asked what the initials stood for. Over time, her work became central to Grant & Ellis's seasonal bridal collections. 3 of her original silhouettes had been featured in magazines. One gown had been worn by a senator's daughter in a New England estate wedding that was quietly profiled in Vogue. And still no one knew who Eloise was. Not even Michael Grant, the man now married to her sister. It was an irony Claire didn't dwell on. When Rachel announced she was engaged to Michael Grant, Claire's stomach tightened, but not from envy. It was the odd convergence of 2 worlds she had tried so hard to keep separate. Rachel, the sister who had spent their entire childhood under a spotlight Claire was never allowed to share. And Michael, the CEO of the very brand that profited from her anonymity. She considered telling him, just once, just to say, "We've worked together before, actually." But then she imagined the look he'd give her, the polite disbelief, followed by the awkward pause. Rachel would twist it into a competition. Their mother would somehow make it about herself. And so Claire did what she always did. She said nothing. She sketched, she sewed, and she stayed quiet. Eloise remained her shield. A creation not just of fashion, but of survival. After years of being diminished and dismissed, Claire learned the power of being unknown. If they couldn't see her, they couldn't undermine her. No one could say she succeeded because of a name or a favor. Every stitch was hers. Every dollar earned without recognition was proof of her worth. And yet there were days when she wondered what it might feel like to be seen. Truly seen not for a title or a label, but for the work and heart beneath it. But that dream had faded over time, replaced by something sturdier: independence. The irony, of course, was that her family still saw her as the struggling one. The artistic child who'd never grow up. Her mother still called her creative the way some people say complicated. Rachel still treated her success as a phase. They spoke of careers but not hers. Weddings but not the ones she helped make unforgettable. No one asked how she paid her bills. No one ever said, "I saw your work in that magazine." Because no one knew. And that was how she wanted it. Until that moment at the estate gate when her mother looked her in the eye and called her a poor designer, as if she were still that girl sketching gowns in a spiral notebook while Rachel tried on pageant dresses. Claire didn't correct her. She didn't say a word. But the moment would stay with her sharper than any insult. Because in that one sentence her mother had confirmed everything Claire had always suspected, that nothing she did would ever be enough to earn her place in that family. Not even building an empire in silence. She had learned to be invisible. But invisibility, as Claire had come to understand, wasn't weakness. It was power. The kind that didn't need to be announced to be undeniable. Rachel reached out on a Tuesday morning 2 months before the wedding. Her voice on the phone was unusually sweet, almost rehearsed. Claire was sipping coffee, reviewing fabric swatches under soft, natural light when the call came through. It had been months since they'd spoken beyond family obligations. That alone should have been a sign. Claire Rachel began, all sugar and silk. "I have a huge favor to ask." Claire had heard that tone before. When they were children, it often came before Rachel borrowed her sketchbooks and never returned them, or convinced their mother that Claire had broken something she hadn't. Still, Claire answered calmly. "What is it?" Rachel launched into her explanation. The wedding budget had ballooned. The venue, the food, the band, everything cost more than they expected. Michael's family had covered most of the major expenses, but there were little things slipping through the cracks. And of course the dress. Claire listened silently as Rachel explained that she had tried other designers, but no one could deliver something truly special on short notice without charging a fortune. "I know it's a lot," Rachel said, lowering her voice slightly. "But I was hoping maybe you could help me. Just this once." Claire didn't answer immediately. She stared at the delicate tool between her fingers, felt the weight of all the years she had spent being overlooked. But then she remembered the girl she used to be, the one who still wanted to be part of something that belonged to the family, even if she'd been pushed to the margins. "I'll do it," Claire said softly. Rachel squealed in delight, then pivoted quickly. "Oh, and Mom has a few ideas too. She'll email you later with notes on the neckline and train. We're thinking something timeless but also photogenic," her word, not mine. The next 8 weeks became a blur of labor. Claire didn't just design the gown, she poured herself into it. She used antique Chantilly lace flown in from France. She hand-stitched hundreds of seed pearls into the bodice. The veil alone took 16 hours, each detail sewn to match the subtle embroidery along the hem. But she didn't stop there. Rachel mentioned that the signage and print work still hadn't been finalized, so Claire offered to help design the invitation suite, the menu cards, the table numbers. She added gold leaf accents by hand. When she saw the vision board for the floral arch was flat and uninspired, she redesigned it, sourced the vendors, and sent it anonymously through a production contact. She did it all quietly, professionally, under the same name she always used, Eloise. Never once did she attach her real name. Not on the labels, not on the files. She never asked for payment. Never even brought it up. And they never offered. There were no thank you calls, no handwritten notes, no text that said, "It's beautiful." The only feedback came through forwarded messages from Linda Train, "Needs to be shorter," or "Rachel wants more sparkle," or "We're concerned about the neckline. It's a little modest." Each comment was delivered like a correction to something inadequate, not a request to someone who had given without asking. Claire adjusted every detail without argument. She worked late into the night, bleeding pinpricks across muslin and tulle, questioning whether this was generosity or simply a return to the old pattern, her giving them taking. What gnawed at her, though, wasn't the silence. It was the familiarity of it. The way her contributions disappeared into the background like hotel music no one really listens to but would miss if it were gone. It was always that way. Claire was expected to give. Rachel was expected to shine. One evening, Claire delivered the final sketch, the one that would become the finished gown. She emailed it to Rachel and copied Linda, noting timelines, fabric shipment status, and estimated delivery. The response came 2 days later from Linda's email address. "Looks fine," it read. "Please confirm there's no visible branding. This is a family event, not a business opportunity." Claire stared at that sentence for a long time. There it was again, that line between family and function. She wasn't their daughter or sister in that moment. She was a service, an invisible hand, a ghost in tulle. A quiet voice inside her began to whisper one she hadn't heard in years. Something is off. But she pushed it down as she always did. Because despite the pattern, despite the years, some part of Claire still believed that if she just gave enough, if she just gave perfectly, maybe they would finally see her. She had no idea just how wrong she was. The wedding invitations were delivered the second week of May, wrapped in ivory envelopes sealed with gold foil R&M, her own custom-designed monogram. Claire recognized the design instantly. She had spent hours refining every detail, the weight of the paper, the angle of the calligraphy, the subtle shimmer of the ink when tilted under light. She had touched every element of those invitations, every visual decision approved under the name Eloise. And yet, when the packages went out, her mailbox remained empty. At first she brushed it off. Maybe it got lost. Maybe they hadn't sent hers yet. There were dozens of guests. These things happened. But as the days stretched into a week and her clients, some of whom were invited, sent screenshots or thanked her privately for the invitation's elegance, a quiet realization began to form in her chest. She hadn't just been forgotten. She'd been excluded. Still, Claire gave them the benefit of the doubt. Old habits died hard. She sent Rachel a message, deliberately casual. "Hey, I didn't get the invite yet. Can you check if it was sent?" Rachel replied with what looked like concern. "Oh, I'm sure Mom handled it. I'll ask her and let you know." Nothing more. No insistence that of course Claire was invited. No apology. No follow-up. Claire stared at the message for a long time. There was no warmth in the words, no urgency. Just a vague promise to check, and she suspected to never mention it again. Rachel had always been good at keeping things pretty on the outside. That night, Claire poured herself a glass of wine and opened her laptop. She found herself scrolling through a bridesmaid's Instagram story. A blurry video panned across the reception board. "Final seating chart," the caption read. Claire paused the frame and leaned in. Her heart thudded as her eyes scanned each column. No Claire, no C, Sutton, no blank place card that might have been a placeholder. There were names she barely remembered, old neighbors, former classmates, even business partners of Linda's, but her own name was nowhere. She checked twice. Then again. It was deliberate. She had designed the very map she was now erased from. She knew the template, the spacing, the fonts. She had arranged the tables herself. Now someone had removed her. Quietly. Surgically. For a long moment, Claire sat motionless. Not because she was shocked, but because it confirmed what she had feared all along: her presence was unwanted. Not inconvenient. Unwanted. Unwelcome. Still, she said nothing. She didn't respond to Rachel. She didn't call her mother. She went back to work. And yet the ache remained. A low, persistent ache that whispered questions into the silence. Why didn't they want her there? Was she really so embarrassing, so disposable? Was the dress enough, but her existence too much? She remembered the hours she'd spent hand-beating Rachel's gown, the embroidery she had redone twice because Linda said it needed more light, the floral motif she reworked from scratch just to match the wedding's updated color palette, the dozen gold-stamped table numbers she reprinted the night before the printers failed. She remembered it all. And now, not even a chair with her name on it. There was something profoundly humiliating about being erased from a moment you helped create. But Claire didn't cry. She had outgrown tears for this family. Instead, she made a decision. A quiet, intentional one. She would attend. Not to beg for a seat, not to shame them, not to reclaim something they had never truly given. She would go because she needed to know once and for all who they really were and who she had become. It wouldn't be about confrontation. It would be about clarity. She began to prepare with the same precision she applied to every client. She selected a dress of her own design, elegant and understated. She chose her jewelry carefully, nothing ostentatious but everything meaningful. She polished her heels, pressed her coat, packed her dignity with her lipstick. If they were going to pretend she didn't exist, she would remind them without a single raised voice that she did, and that she never needed their permission to show up. The sun hadn't shifted. The florals still bloomed exactly where she'd envisioned them. The marble steps gleamed as if polished by memory itself. And Claire Sutton stood where she had feared she would outside her own creation, denied entry, not by chance, but by design. The staff member glanced at the screen once more, apologetic. "I'm really sorry. You're not on the guest list, and we were given strict instructions." Claire said nothing. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind, but the quiet sting of reality ran deeper than any fantasy. In the silence that followed, her eyes found movement, heels clacking, perfume trailing, then settled on the figure approaching. Linda Sutton, poised as ever, radiated control. She walked with a calmness Claire recognized well, the confidence of someone who believed themselves beyond reproach. She reached the entrance, offered the staff member a tight smile, then turned to Claire. "I told you," Linda said. Her voice was low-cutting. "We can't have a poor designer standing beside a man like Michael. It would reflect poorly on Rachel. On all of us." Claire blinked slowly. "I'm not here to stand beside anyone." Linda narrowed her eyes. "Why are you here, then, to make a scene? Don't you think you've taken enough from this family?" Claire almost laughed. Taken. She thought about the hours she'd worked unpaid, unseen. The late nights, the care, the silence she'd maintained when her name was erased from the seating chart she had designed. "You didn't even send me an invitation," Claire said. Linda didn't flinch. It would have made things complicated. And the seat. "There wasn't space," her mother answered flatly. "Besides, you've never really belonged to this world, Claire. We gave you a roof and education. We tolerated your little hobby." Claire felt her stomach go cold. Tolerated. That word, spoken so easily, erased years of effort of trying to prove she could belong, not through obedience, but through excellence. Not through polish, but through purpose. "You never saw me," Claire whispered. Linda tilted her head, her voice sharp now. "I saw what you were trying to be. It was never enough." Something inside Claire settled. Not broke, not snapped. Settled like dust finding its place after a long fall. She adjusted her posture slightly, not in defiance but clarity. Her voice was calm. "Check your email," she said. Linda frowned. "Excuse me?" Claire's words were measured. Invoice sent. She turned, this time not with hesitation or wounded pride. but with purpose. She walked back down the same path she had once dreamed of walking as a maid of honor, or even just a sister. That dream had died long ago. Today she buried the ashes. Each step away from the estate felt quieter, cleaner. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She didn't let anger ruin the grace she had fought so long to claim. She didn't need to be let in. She had let herself out. By the time she returned to her apartment, Savannah was bathed in the soft gold of evening. She undid her heels, set her coat down, and made tea. No one called that night. Not yet. But the next morning they began. Her phone lit up in pulses. 1 call, then 5. By lunch, there were 23. By evening, 57. By the third day, 98 missed calls, all from the same number. Her mother. Her name. Her voice reaching across a line that had been severed too long ago to be rewired with panic. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to hear the excuses, or the disbelief, or the plea to not overreact. She knew what they had found. The invoice. Itemized. Signed. The value of what they had stolen listed, taxed, and legally binding. She stirred her tea and looked out the window. The late afternoon sun streamed through the glass. A breeze fluttered the sheer curtains. In that moment, Claire Sutton wasn't grieving. She was free. The wedding had ended in spectacle dancing under chandeliers, champagne flutes clinking, a sea of curated perfection that Rachel had engineered down to the last crystal centerpiece. Guests had left dazzled. Flashbulbs had faded. The band had packed up, and the catering crew moved quietly through the halls. Now, at last, it was just them. Michael stood by the bedroom window of the honeymoon suite, still in his tuxedo shirt, his jacket folded neatly over a chair. Rachel was humming to herself as she adjusted her gown one last time in the mirror, unable to resist another look at what she called the most important dress of her life. He glanced over, and that's when he noticed it. Just beneath the inside hem of the gown, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, was a delicate hand-stitched signature, an intertwining E and a single slanted L. Stylized. Subtle, but unmistakable. His brow furrowed. He stepped closer, gently lifting the fabric. "Wait, is this—" His voice trailed. Rachel looked up, startled. What Michael didn't answer right away. His mind was already sprinting through possibilities. He'd seen that monogram before on sketches, on prototypes, on fabric samples sent to his design team. It was the signature of Eloise, the elusive designer who had become the centerpiece of every internal meeting for 6 months. They had been chasing her, whoever she was. She refused every interview, never signed contracts directly, only worked through third-party intermediaries. Her designs had elevated their seasonal bridal line. She had single-handedly revived Grant & Ellis's declining luxury segment. Michael's entire board had agreed if they could lock her down with an exclusive, she'd be the crown jewel of their brand. "Where did you get this dress?" he asked. Rachel blinked. "What do you mean, you saw it being fitted?" "No. Who designed it?" There was a pause. Rachel smoothed her hands over the fabric. "It's custom," she said carefully. "We didn't go through a brand." "I can see that," he said. "But who made it?" She hesitated too long. Michael's voice sharpened. "Rachel." Her eyes flicked away. She looked caught and worse, guilty. "Claire," she admitted almost in a whisper. "Claire made it." Michael stared at her, stunned. Rachel tried to laugh it off. "You know, she went to school for design or something. She offered to help with the dress when we were over budget." "It wasn't a big deal." He stepped back, a knot forming in his chest. "Claire is Eloise." Rachel's mouth opened, but no words came. Michael had never seen her look that way, cornered, vulnerable. She couldn't lie fast enough to catch up to the truth. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that the most brilliant designer we've ever worked with, the person I've been negotiating with through legal for 6 months, the one our team built our next quarter around, is your sister?" Rachel was flushed now. "You're overreacting. She didn't even charge us. And honestly, it was better this way. You know how dramatic she gets. If we made a big deal of it, it would have turned into some sob story about the family again. Michael's jaw tightened. You erased her. From her own work. She's always been like that. Emotional. Difficult. She's not... Rachel stopped herself. She's not a brand, Michael. She's just... Claire. But he wasn't listening anymore. He was thinking back to the email exchanges. The sketches that arrived at 3 a.m., brimming with originality. The sample dress that reduced their VP of design to stunned silence. The signature. The deliberate mystery. And how much of his future success of their company's future had been tied to this ghost of a creator. She had been right in front of them. And he had married the person who had knowingly pushed her into the shadows. Michael turned away from Rachel and stared out the window. Outside, the estate grounds were still bathed in wedding lanterns flickering gently in the night breeze. I don't believe this, he said under his breath. Rachel approached him cautiously. It's not like she needed the attention. She's always been... complicated. I just wanted the day to be simple. He turned his voice low but hard. You sabotaged a multi-million-dollar relationship. You lied. You humiliated her. Rachel straightened. She didn't belong here. He stared at her for a long time as if seeing her clearly for the first time. She built this entire day, he said. And you made sure she couldn't attend. The silence between them thickened. Outside, the lanterns began to flicker out. Inside, something else had already gone dark. The invoice arrived on a quiet Wednesday morning. It was delivered via email, no subject line, no message body. Just a professionally formatted PDF attachment labeled Design Services, R. Sutton Wedding. Linda clicked on it absent-mindedly, expecting perhaps a late RSVP or vendor receipt. But as the document opened, her hand froze on the mouse. Line after line detailed the costs. Hand-stitched lace imported from France, bespoke embroidery, custom calligraphy for all signage foil-stamped invitations, personalized design, consultation hours, rush delivery, late-night alterations, and stylized table decor. It read like a luxury showroom catalog, because it was. Each line methodically accounted for labor materials and exclusivity. At the bottom, bolded but without drama, was the total $27,500. Below that, due in full within 7 business days. No note, no greeting, no passive-aggressive remarks. Just the kind of clean, professional, legally sound invoice one might expect from a high-end couture atelier. Because that's exactly what it was. Linda's face went pale. She stared at the figure as if it were a threat. This must be a mistake, she muttered, clicking back to the inbox, hoping for another message, a follow-up, a retraction, some emotional plea that would make it all less... formal. But there was nothing. No explanation. No emotion. Just that invoice. Across the kitchen, Rachel sipped her coffee and scrolled through her phone. What's wrong? Linda didn't respond immediately. She simply turned the laptop screen toward her daughter. Rachel leaned in. Her smile faded. You've got to be kidding me, she whispered. She's charging us. Linda's voice sharpened. She didn't say anything about money. She offered to help. Rachel stared at the itemized breakdown. $27,000. For what fabric and ink? She included labor, Linda said, rereading the lines. Design hours, licensing. The lace alone cost, good Lord. Rachel pushed her chair back and stood. No, I'm not letting this slide. I'm calling her. She picked up her phone, already dialing. Michael, entering from the other room, paused when he saw the laptop screen. What's that? Rachel turned. An invoice. From Claire. She's billing us for the dress. And everything else. Michael walked over, read it in silence, then looked up. Good. Rachel blinked. Good. Michael's voice was calm. Too calm. She's charging you for work you used. Work you erased her from. I didn't erase her. You didn't invite her. You lied to me about who made the dress. You let your mother insult her at the door. Rachel folded her arms. I didn't know she was Eloise when I asked for the dress. But you knew she was your sister. And that should have been enough. Michael's jaw clenched. She was never the problem, Rachel. Rachel's phone vibrated in her hand. Claire's name on the screen. She answered quickly. It rang once, then voicemail. She tried again. Straight to voicemail. Again. Declined. Across the table, Linda was already scrolling through her contacts. She can't possibly expect us to pay this. This is family. Michael raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call it? Linda ignored him and tapped Claire's name. It rang. Voicemail. Again. Declined. Again. No answer. She tried 5 times in a row, pacing the kitchen, now flustered. She's ignoring me. Can you blame her? Michael said. You used her talent, dismissed her worth, and called her poor in front of your guests. Linda turned flustered and red. This is outrageous. She's always been dramatic. We took her in when she was young, gave her everything. And now she sends us invoices like we're strangers. Michael met her gaze evenly. Maybe because that's how you treated her. Linda's mouth opened, but no words came. Rachel sat back down slowly, phone still in hand. Her cheeks flushed not with anger, but something closer to shame. Outside, the sun had begun to rise higher in the sky, illuminating the gleaming surfaces of the house Claire had helped decorate from afar. The invitations still sat stacked in a decorative tray, the ones guests had fawned over. A framed copy of the menu she had designed leaned against a vase of wilting hydrangeas. Claire's work surrounded them, silent, elegant, undeniable. But Claire herself was gone, and she had taken her silence with her. By evening, Linda's phone showed 27 missed calls. By the end of the next day, 49. The morning after that, 98. All to the same number. All unanswered. Claire wasn't just ignoring them. She was at long last unseen by choice. The house hadn't changed much. Dust clung to the baseboards, the floor creaked in familiar places, and the scent old wood, faint lavender lingered in the corners like memory. Claire stood in the entryway, keys in hand, the echo of her footsteps pulling her deeper into the past. She hadn't returned here in years. It was her childhood home, or what remained of it. After her father died, everything felt colder. Linda had repainted the walls, removed most of the books, replaced furniture with sleek modern pieces that never matched the warmth the house used to have. Eventually, Claire moved out. Not in anger, just in self-defense. Now that the property was finally being sold, she had agreed to come back for one final walkthrough to clear out anything she might have left behind. The attic was still cramped. Dust motes danced in the slivers of late afternoon light spilling through the small circular window. Cardboard boxes lined the far wall, some marked in her father's handwriting, neat, curved, patient. She opened the one labeled Claire, sketchbooks. Inside were the notebooks he had saved early drawings of dresses made from colored pencil and glue, some no more than stick figures with gowns. A few crumpled watercolors. One small journal she barely remembered keeping. At the bottom of the box was a thin white envelope. Her name was written on it in his hand, Claire. She froze. It hadn't yellowed with age. The ink wasn't faded. It had been preserved, sealed in plastic, tucked away deliberately. She sank slowly onto the attic floor, her back against the wooden beam, and opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sheet of folded stationery. "My brilliant Claire," it began. She had to stop for a moment. She hadn't heard those words in so long. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay long enough to see where your light would take you. But I see it already. You were never like the rest of them. You saw the world sideways in colors most people ignore, and I know it hurt when they didn't understand. But don't you dare dim that light to make yourself smaller. Don't trade your voice for their approval. Don't ever give up what makes you shine just to make them comfortable." She brought her hand to her mouth, unable to breathe. "I know your path won't be straight. I know you'll question yourself. But promise me this: whatever room you walk into, walk in as yourself. They may never accept you, but that doesn't mean you don't belong. You do, just as you are." Her chest collapsed with a sob, the kind that came from deep inside untouched for years. Tears spilled freely now, streaking her cheeks and falling onto her lap. She hadn't cried when they removed her from the guest list. She hadn't cried when her mother humiliated her at the door. She hadn't cried when her work was exploited and erased. But this undid her. To be seen, to be understood, even after all this time, even from beyond the grave. She pressed the letter against her heart and wept. It wasn't grief. It was recognition. It was the moment a part of her long buried finally rose to the surface and said, "I exist." Later, when the tears had dried and the attic was bathed in the soft gold of early evening, Claire folded the letter gently and placed it in her bag. She walked downstairs slowly, pausing in the hallway where her childhood sketches had once been pinned to the wall before being replaced with Rachel's academic certificates. She looked at the empty space now and for the first time didn't feel like she needed it back. Back at her apartment, she pulled up her design website. Until now, everything had been branded Eloise. Anonymous. Elegant. Disconnected. She opened her designer profile. Her bio. She deleted the pseudonym. In its place, she typed, Claire Sutton. Designer. Artist. Creator. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Her hand hovered over the mouse. Then she clicked publish. And just like that, she stepped fully into the light her father had always seen. The press release was simple. No dramatic language, no fanfare. Just a clean white background, a serif header, and a statement that read, Claire Sutton Atelier, Couture Reclaimed. It hit the industry like thunder. Within hours, fashion blogs exploded with speculation. Whispers turned into headlines. Screenshots flooded social media captioned with the same stunned question, Eloise. Is Claire Sutton? By noon, Claire's inbox was overflowing. Interview requests from Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle. Feature inquiries. Offers for panel talks. Designers she had once admired from afar were now asking for collaborations. Major couture houses in New York, Paris, and Milan were requesting meetings. Even her old design school reached out asking her to return as an honored alumna. But it wasn't the attention that stirred Claire. It was the name. Her name. For the first time in her career, the world wasn't praising a myth or a mystery. They weren't marveling at the elusive Eloise. They were seeing her Claire Sutton as the mind and hands behind every stitch, every silhouette, every moment of grace that had walked down a runway or glided down an aisle. The new studio was quiet, still scented with fresh paint and eucalyptus candles. The space was modest, not grand exactly how she liked it. Clean white walls, sunlight from the high windows, a single table in the center with her sketchbooks open. On the far wall, the new logo had just been installed in brushed gold, Claire Sutton Atelier. She stood in front of it for a long moment, her arms folded, her eyes thoughtful. She didn't need applause. She had built this with her own 2 hands, piece by piece, heartbreak by heartbreak, and finally with truth. Her assistant, a sharp young designer named Keisha, entered with a tablet. You've got 3 more interview requests, she said. And this just came in from Grant and Ellis. Claire didn't flinch. She took the tablet and glanced at the offer. A full page of legalese brand language revenue share breakdowns. But the signature at the bottom caught her eye. Michael Grant, CEO. She stared at it for a long beat. The offer was generous, far more than what she had charged for her sister's wedding. It was the kind of deal designers waited a lifetime to receive. Claire had once dreamed of working with companies like his. But that was before they erased her, before they chose silence over recognition, before they tried to package her art while discarding her name. She handed the tablet back to Keisha. Please respond, she said calmly. Tell them I'm not interested. Keisha blinked. You sure? Claire's voice was clear. I'm not interested in partnerships built on lies. Keisha smiled. I'll take care of it. Claire turned back toward the large drafting table where a new design was slowly taking shape. Not a bridal gown this time. A collection. Her first full couture line under her real name. No ghost signature. No hidden authorship. Just her. Later that evening, she posted a single photo on social media. A shot of her hand resting gently over a sketch pad. The caption read, "It took me years to believe I belonged. Now I no longer need permission to stand in the light." The post went viral within hours. Claire didn't read the comments. She didn't have to. For once, she wasn't chasing approval. She was walking forward finally under her own name. Rachel had always been good at pretending. Pretending she was in control. Pretending her marriage was perfect. Pretending that the silence between her and her sister had always been mutual. But no amount of social polish could conceal the shift that had begun after the wedding. It started small. Michael coming home later than usual, eating dinners in silence, no longer reaching for her hand as they walked through crowded events. She told herself it was the stress of their new life together, the pressure of company expectations, the transition into married life. But deep down she knew. Trust once cracked never settles back into place the same way. Michael no longer asked about her day, no longer showed her upcoming campaigns. One night when she reached for his laptop, he pulled it away instinctively. It was a small gesture, but it confirmed what she feared. He no longer saw her as a partner. And worse, he no longer looked at her with pride. She'd lost something that night. Not in a scandal, not in a dramatic argument, but in a look, a silence, a distance that grew every day. One afternoon, Rachel found herself standing outside a glass studio downtown. A name was etched across the front in minimalist gold: Claire Sutton Atelier. She stared at it for a long time before reaching for the handle. The receptionist recognized her instantly, but didn't smile. "I'm here to see Claire," Rachel said quietly. "One moment." The receptionist picked up the phone, murmured something, then nodded. "You can wait in the front." The minutes passed slowly. When Claire finally emerged, she wore simple black slacks and a crisp white blouse. Her hair pulled back, her face calm. Not cold, not angry, just resolved. Rachel stood. "I need to talk to you." Claire gestured toward a side office. No words, just emotion. Inside, they sat across from one another at a small round table. Claire waited. Rachel's voice cracked before it even began. "I'm sorry." Claire nodded slowly as if acknowledging the sound but not the meaning. "I was wrong," Rachel continued. "About everything. I was jealous. And I thought if I ignored you, you'd stop shining. But you didn't. You just got stronger." Claire didn't speak. Rachel wiped her eyes. "Michael barely looks at me. He doesn't say it, but I know what he's thinking. That I'm small, that I'm petty." And I was. Claire leaned forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "You weren't just petty, Rachel. You were cruel." Rachel looked down. "I know." Claire's expression didn't harden, but it didn't soften either. "You erased me from my own work. You used my hands, my talent, my time, and then locked me out. You called me family only when it was convenient. I didn't realize what I was doing." "Yes," Claire interrupted. "You did." Rachel's throat tightened. "I didn't come here to make excuses," she whispered. "I came to ask for your forgiveness." There was a long silence. Claire exhaled slowly. "I forgave you," she said at last. Rachel's eyes lifted in surprise. But Claire continued, "That doesn't mean you belong in my life." The words weren't harsh. They were simply the truth. Rachel sat frozen. "I spent too many years shrinking myself so you and Mom wouldn't feel uncomfortable," Claire said. "I made myself invisible so I wouldn't be a threat. I stayed quiet when you took what wasn't yours. But that part of me is gone now. I don't want revenge. I don't want an apology." Claire stood, her voice steady. "I want peace." Rachel remained seated, stunned. Claire walked to the door, opened it gently. Rachel looked up, eyes damp, voice barely above a whisper. So this is it. Claire didn't turn back. It was over a long time ago. You just didn't notice. Rachel rose slowly, clutching her purse. She looked around the studio so full of light, filled with fabrics and sketches and life. A place of purpose, of creation. A place she could never step into honestly again. As she stepped outside into the evening air, the truth settled into her chest, heavier than guilt. She hadn't just lost a sister. She had lost the only person who had ever offered her unconditional love and buried it beneath pride. Now that door would remain closed, and the echo of Claire's final words would follow her home. The studio buzzed with quiet energy. Bolts of fabric lined the shelves. Dress forms stood like silent witnesses, and rays of morning sun poured through the tall windows, casting long golden lines across the polished floor. But today, something was different. The long table in the center, once reserved solely for Claire's sketchbooks and samples, had been cleared. In its place were plain notepads, sharpened pencils, and rolls of inexpensive muslin. A dozen folding chairs circled around it. Each one held a girl, some barely out of high school, some older, all with nervous eyes and hesitant hands. Claire stood at the head of the table. She wasn't dressed like a fashion icon. She wore soft denim, a loose white shirt, and her hair tucked casually behind one ear. There was no runway, no press, no grandeur, just her and them. She introduced herself without fanfare. She spoke of lines of balance of color theory, but not like a lecturer, like someone opening a door she had once been locked out of. Then she paused. I know some of you don't believe you belong in a space like this, she said. I know what it feels like to be overlooked, to be told your dreams are silly, to hear your voice and then doubt it. The room was still, eyes fixed on her. She continued, her tone gentle. This is not just a studio. This is a room where no one asks if you're worthy. You already are. You just haven't been taught how to say it with fabric yet. A young girl raised her hand. Maybe 16, with tight curls pulled back into a makeshift bun and secondhand jeans patched at the knee. My aunt says fashion is only for the rich, she said, almost whispering. I'm poor. Can someone like me really do what you do? The words hung in the air. Claire stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. Luxury, she said, is not about money. It's about knowing your worth. The girl blinked as if unsure whether to believe her. Claire smiled. The most valuable thing I ever made didn't cost a fortune. It cost courage. Somewhere someone let out a shaky breath. A tear rolled down a cheek. Not out of sadness, but recognition. As the lesson went on, they sketched their first lines. Tentative at first, then bolder. They held fabric up to the light. They asked questions. They laughed nervously, then freely. When the day ended, the girls filed out slowly, each lingering just a bit longer than expected. One of them placed a folded thank you note on the table. Another asked if they could come back tomorrow. Claire remained alone in the studio once more. She walked to the back corner where an old corkboard leaned against the wall. Pinned to it was a yellowed sketch, slightly uneven lines, watercolors faded. It was her first dress, drawn when she was 10, colored with markers glued with scraps of lace. She picked it up gently, then moved to the central table. There, under the sunlight, she unrolled clean paper. She began to draw. The lines flowed easily now, not because she had mastered the art, but because she no longer questioned her right to make them. Her name was no longer hidden behind a signature. Her hands were no longer invisible. She signed it at the bottom, Claire Sutton, with calm, confident strokes. The sunlight shifted, catching the page just right. The sketch shimmered faintly, the ink still wet. She stepped back, tilted her head, and smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. And this time everyone would see it. And that's how Claire Sutton, once the forgotten girl in the shadow of her sister, reclaimed her name, her voice, and her future. Not with vengeance, but with clarity. Not through conflict, but through truth. She didn't need to prove her worth to those who once turned her away. She became a light to those who had never been seen. And perhaps that's the most powerful revenge of all, not when you fight to be accepted, but when you thrive without needing to be. So what would you have done if you were Claire? Would you have walked away? Would you have sent the invoice? Or would you have taken it further? We want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let us know which part of Claire's story struck you the most. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, don't forget to subscribe. Every week we bring you powerful tales of betrayal, healing, and transformation. Because sometimes the quietest voice tells the loudest story. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.